Hi everyone, and welcome to episode 3 of Dungeon Master's Journal. I'm Anthony, and thanks for coming back and checking in on the next piece as we follow my and my party's adventures of running through the Out of the Abyss 5th edition D&D campaign book. We just played our third session last night. It was a lot of fun. I knew it was going to be a big session, both not necessarily big because it was going to be super long or anything like that, but it had some important events happen in it. I was really excited to see how the players were going to react to that and deal with that, and it definitely did not disappoint. So just to give you a really nutshell recap of what's gone on so far is, we're our third weekend, so this was our third session. And our party all started off as prisoners of the Drow in the Underdark, an outpost called Velkenvelv. In their first week, they escaped that prison with some demonic beasties that were flying around to create a distraction for them. And the second part of our adventure, the second week, I should say, they spent most of their time traversing the Underdark, going towards a place called Sloopbudop, which was a Kuatoa settlement. And they were kind of being led there by Sereth, who is actually also a Drow, but one who was one of their fellow prisoners. He's an NPC. So that was kind of the majority of second session, was like 8 days of travel time as they kind of fled through the Underdark from Drow pursuers. And that second session was very difficult for them, very messy, partially due to the roles, partially due to choices, partially due to NPCs, that kind of thing. So anyways, we ended off our second session with them getting to within like an hour's walk of Sloopbudop. They could kind of see the city in there, or the village in the background, and as they got to that point, they were kind of ambushed by a party of these Kuatoa, which are like these really bizarre fish people. And at that point, our bard, like our class bard, we have a character named Bard as well, but our classed bard, his name's Ken. Ken stepped forward, and these Kuatoa were like, well, who are you? Where are you from? That kind of thing. And Ken said, oh, we're surfacers, like we're from the surface world. At which point all the Kuatoa were like, from the surface. And the leader said, oh, I claim you in the name of the Deep Father. And that's where things kind of ended off last time. So we picked up right there for yesterday's play session. They had a little bit more dialogue with these Kuatoa. And they actually have a Kuatoa NPC that was a fellow prisoner in their group named Shushar the Awakened. And Shushar basically steps forward and says, like, look, you guys need to kind of just calm down. These guys are with me. They're fine. And these people basically looked at him and said, oh, that's Shushar? He's a heretic. Take them for sure. So Shushar is a pacifist. He does not fight. So he kind of just sat down and waited for things to finish. The party put up a pretty good fight in this context, and they did a little bit better than I thought they would. I think they wound up like killing one of their assailants. They put another one to sleep and wounded another one, kind of thing. But ultimately, the leader of this group is what's called a Kuatoa Monitor, which for all intents and purposes is like a monk class. So against a party of level 2 PCs, even with some NPC backup, they put them down. The thing is that it wasn't like a TPK. Their intent was not to kill the characters. Their intent was to knock them out and capture them and bring them back to Sloopbudop, to the altar of the Deep Father, and essentially sacrifice them at this altar. So that's what they did. So they all were knocked out, and when they came to, 30 minutes later, they're bound in wire, and they kind of have fishing nets over them, and they're just being paraded through towards Sloopbudop by this crew. And at that moment, they chose to just kind of say, well, we should just wait till we're in the city to see what happens next. And at that moment, they get ambushed by a second party of Kuatoa, a little smaller in number, but these ones kind of look different. And they essentially start fighting the Kuatoa who originally captured the PCs. Now, at this point, our orc barbarian, or half-orc barbarian, the player is a she, but the character is a he. He rolls his strength check and basically breaks through his bonds. And his very first action is to go over then to the next character and just basically rip his bonds open, because she was rolling really well for her character's checks. It was pretty funny to watch, actually. So all said and done, we didn't do a formal combat for that second piece. It was more of a narrative thing, if anything, but it ended with essentially this new group of Kuo-toa having killed or driven off most of the other ones. And one of these Kuo-toa looked a little bit more ceremonial, kind of had some badges of office. He had a very ceremonial looking staff and kind of a headdress type of thing, because this Kuo-toa was a priest, like an archpriest, so to speak, of the Sea Mother. And the Sea Mother is kind of like the Kuo-toan, one of the two primary gods, and the only one to really kind of come across or be mentioned for our purposes. And the god that has the most presence in this town, or at least did. And they do a little bit of back and forth with the characters, but essentially what this Kuo-toa says on their walk back, because he convinces the characters, look, like the Sea Mother has answered my prayers in bringing you to me, because we need your help. So if you please come with me, we'll provide you safe entrance into Sloopbudop and all that kind of thing. So the characters went ahead with that, and what in that half-hour walk to the city gates, this archpriest, who I think his name is Bloop Bloop Plop or something like that, because they all have these wonky names. They're one of the stranger creatures. They're all kind of nutty. He essentially describes a scenario where he says, look, a few weeks ago, my daughter received a powerful vision in her dreams, kind of thing, about an entity that she's calling the Deep Father, named Limugugun. And it basically says, so ever since she received that vision, she has now become like an archpriestess of the Deep Father, as opposed to the Sea Mother. And I would be quick to, wave this away, except that she actually became substantially more powerful. She was kind of like an apprentice level caster to him. And then all of a sudden overnight, she was kind of like equal to him. And like, game rule wise, the archpriest is like a level 10 caster, so that's kind of a big deal. So he says, and ever since then, it's basically split our society in two, and it's creating a whole bunch of trouble. So we need your help. So he says, I'm going to bring you to the characters ask him, like, is there somewhere we can rest, because like we're rough. We've been traveling in the Underdark for 8 days, which is no picnic. The Underdark is not like the surface world. It's really terrible. And on top of that, they had like just escaped the Drow pursuit party, and they just got ambushed by Kuo-toa. So he's like, yeah, for sure, you're going to come to my place, and I'll give you a spot to rest. So that's what they did. So he leads them through, and he's kind of pointing out, like, okay, over here is the docks, and, you'll notice how our settlement is built, and blah, blah, blah. And he brings them to, then, this altar. And the altar is, like, really funny and gross. So it's an altar to the Sea Mother. And what it essentially is described as is, like, the torso and kind of lower arms carved out of some kind of wood that looks vaguely female humanoid. But then the head and the hands parts are literally like organic pieces of a giant albino crayfish. It's like a big crayfish head and crayfish claws that are just like lashed to the statue. And the whole thing just reeks of like bad shellfish and dead seafood and that kind of thing. And it's being worshipped by Kuo-toa, and there's guards circling it, and there's all kinds of precious stones and seashells, and even the odd Kuo-toa coming up and just vomiting on the shrine. Because the idea is that the Sea Mother is kind of like a scavenger goddess. And it's customary to give an offering to get her good favor of usually like something that is personal to you. You just leave it at the altar. And it's considered a great show of faith to throw up on it, because it's like, oh, here's like, this is so personal to me because it was my food, and I'm just going to give it to you. That's how they look at it. So he brings them there because his home is kind of right beside this statue. And he says, he kind of explains this customary make an offering type of thing. But he's the archpriest, so it's not like, hey, I'm just telling you this. He says, so you go make an offering now. And what was funny is that before he could even get the whole sentence out of his mouth, the bard, Ken LaFlaunt, basically says, "Oh, I just go over to the statue and I throw up on it." And I'm like, "Oh, well, all the Kuo-toa are like, pretty impressed by your show of faith, and so big nods of approval to you." And then our our warlock basically says, "Well, I'm so grossed out by what I'm smelling and what I just witnessed that I like involuntarily throw up on it." And I'm like, "Yeah, that works." And then I think the half orc, I don't think he threw up on it. I can't exactly remember. He might have just given something. But then the paladin says, "Yeah, I'm not doing that. This is heresy." And at that point, the archpriest is like, "What do you mean you're not doing that?" And at this point, all the other party members are like, "Dude, just like do it. Like you don't have to throw up. Just like, do you have like a knife or a dagger or something?" And the paladin says, "Well, yeah, I've got like a little something, but I'm not putting it there." And at this point, the four guards have kind of formed up behind the archpriest, and the archpriest is kind of looking at him cockeyed. And the paladin is human and doesn't speak under common, and the archpriest only speaks under common. So the archpriest just knows that something's not right. He doesn't really understand what's happening, but the air is getting kind of thick, and the paladin is just like, "No, I'm not." Sir Bastion is his name, Robert Bastion. He says, "I'm not. This is like a fake god. Like I'm not doing this. It kind of goes against what I believe." And eventually, the other PC members, seeing how things are getting kind of rough, our Ken LaFlaunt just says, "Can you just give me one of your knives?" And he's like, the paladin just kind of rolls his eyes like, "Fine, here's like one of my blades to you, Ken." And then Ken, who does speak under common, kind of looks at the archpriest and says, "Look, see, this is his knife, and he has given it to me to put over here. So there it is." And the archpriest was just kind of like not really pleased with how it all went down, but he accepts it. And he's like, "Okay, fine. So now come over here to my hovel." So he brings him in his home and lays out his plan. And he basically says, "Thanks for coming, and feel free to make yourself at home here. But here's what I want you to do: is we need to put an end to this whole Deep Father cult thing in our town. So my plan is that I'm going to with some of my incumbents type of thing, we're going to go to the Shrine of the Deep Father, and we're going to have captured you guys. So we'll have you all bound, but your ropes will be loose kind of thing. And we're going to take all your weapons and put them in this bag, and we're going to bring the bag with us. And the idea here is that I'm going to go to my daughter, and I'm going to say, that the time has come for us to just, accept your vision and accept the Deep Father. And so as a show of good faith, we are going to offer you these surface dwellers as sacrifices to the Deep Father. And we're all going to play along with this. And then when the time is just right, wait for my signal, and I'm going to we can all attack, and we're just going to cut the head off the snake kind of thing. And the PCs, kind of took a while not a while, but I mean, they asked some questions to fully understand the plan, and then said, "Okay, we're good to go." At that point in time, they said, "Well, can we have some food?" And he says, "Yeah." So he opens up this closet-y kind of area and grabs some seaweed and some like shellfish type food, and is bringing it over to them. And the characters notice that this cupboard he opened is just full of treasure, like full of treasure. And a few of them made insight checks. It's like, well, you can probably reason out that all of this treasure you're seeing is probably the leftovers of not so fortunate visitors to Sloopbudop, maybe ones who got sacrificed. Because even the Sea Mother will accept sacrifices. It's just very rare and not nearly as bloodthirsty as the Deep Father, Limagugun. So the character's like, "Hey, can we have some of that?" And he basically says, "Oh, you can have all of it. If we succeed, if you help us out." And I said, "Oh, well, that's pretty cool, but like, could we have some of it now? Like, maybe it could help us out." And he says, "I'll tell you what, and as a show of good faith, you can pick one thing." Now, the characters thought that he was saying, like, "Oh, each of you can pick one thing," but it was just like, pick one thing. So I named off what was kind of in this treasure hoard, aside from cash, because obviously cash is going to be helpful to them. And while they're kind of debating what they should take and what it all is, the half-orc says, "Well, I'd grab a healing potion." because there's 2 of those in there. So he grabs a healing potion, and the other characters are still talking amongst themselves, and we're just going to call him Bloop for short, because that's what the book says you can do anyways. Is he says, okay, good choice, and closes the door, and everyone's like, whoa, what? He said, yeah, I told you could take one thing. And then like, okay, well, at least we got a healing potion. That's going to be useful if we have to fight. So at that point, they do their rest and recuperate their hit points and their spell slots and that kind of thing. And the paladin has been hard up for holy water. He wants holy water so he can cast bless. The problem is that holy water has an actual cost associated to it, in that it says to create holy water you have to have, I can't remember the exact, it's like between 10 and 20 or 10 and 25 gold worth of powdered silver. And if you have that powdered silver, you just basically mix that with water and kind of say a prayer, and boom, you've got holy water. And once he has his big flask of holy water, he'll pretty much be good to cast bless until that holy water should be stolen or destroyed or something, because he makes a big flask and he only needs a little bit of it to cast the spell. So he's been trying to get his hands on powdered silver, and he's asking around like, oh, do you guys have like metal workers here? Because I've got silver, I just need it powdered up, and do you have anything that, and he's like, nah, sorry, no, we're just like a fishing village. So that didn't work out for him, but so anyways, they rest and they get all their stuff back, and the next morning kind of thing, or the hours later, the guy comes back and says, okay, are you ready to go? And the players say, yeah, okay. So he says, great. So this is, I'm going to introduce you to my son. And the son is kind of like, faithful to the sea mother and to his dad, but a little bit wary of outsiders. And they kind of play up this show like there's disagreement between the 2 of them publicly to make it the act more believable that they're kind of going to the Deep Father and submitting there. So he says, okay, let's go. So he leads them to the Deep Father altar, which is super weird and gross. It's like this piece of leather carved into the shape of a manta ray, and then there is a dead manta ray on that sheet of leather, and it's all pegged out and stretched and tied with twine to like these 3 or 4 support posts. And then on top of the manta ray are like 2 dead octopus with their heads lashed together and their tentacles, again, kind of artfully splayed out onto these pegs. And the whole thing just reeks of blood, and the stone around it is stained red with sacrifice and that type of thing. So they get there, and the father says, it's time for us to just to kind of all be one, and we're going to submit to the Deep Father, yada, yada, yada. And the priestess essentially says, well, Father, it's about time you came around, and I'm glad that you're seeing the light. And yes, we will accept your sacrifices. So they take the characters and they shove them into one side of the area, and then all of the Kuo-toa start kind of chanting and parading in circles around the altar, right? And while the characters are shoved over there, they see that there's already another creature there that's been prepped for sacrifice, and it's a Duergar or Duergar. I can't think of the correct pronunciation right now, but essentially the Duergar are like evil dwarves. They're like deep dwarves. They're like gray skinned, white hair. I think they got white eyes. They're classed as being lawful evil, so they're not gonna be like just kill you on sight, but they're gonna find ways to make your life not that great usually. But anyways, they meet this guy, and they don't know too much about him even as of the end of the session, but they did kind of figure out his name, and they figured out that he's been beaten half to death and prepped for sacrifice. And they basically say, look, if we can get you like a dagger or a short sword or something, will you help us here? And the guy was like, I don't know who you are, but I'm 100% on board if it is about getting out of this. So they said, yeah. So they're waiting, and they see their bag of weapons has just kind of been thrown up against the altar. They're maybe 15 or 20 feet away from that. So, they basically are waiting for, they're like, well, when is this all going to go down? And our half-orc barbarian is not super intelligent, and he overhears Ken LaFlaunt talking to this dark, this like deep dwarf as Duergar, and at one point he says something to the tune of like, okay, well, we're glad that you're all aboard the train. And the half-orc says, I hear all aboard the train, and I think that that's the sign. So I jump up and I run over, and her thinking is, I have to destroy the shrine. I need to destroy this altar because I'm sure it has something to do with this. So at that point, they realize that the captives are freed, and so the archpriest kind of takes a look around, and takes his scepter and just smacks his daughter and basically says, "To arms!" And so this big battle starts. So there's this little stone dais that's not super tall or anything, but there's this little stone dais that essentially the archpriest and his daughter are kind of dueling it out. And then beneath them is probably in total 24 Kuo-toa warriors that are battling with each other. The characters can't even really tell which faction is which, sort of thing. And then there's the player characters and their NPCs who are all, fake bound, and this one Duergar that's really bound. So the fight starts, and they're knocking some heads around, and a few, the Kuo-toa are dying off, and the characters are to the best of their ability wailing on the archpriestess because they figure, well, she's the big bad, she's a powerful spellcaster, we need to get rid of her. And they're right, because once she started getting pressed, she threw out a spell that in one go did like 3d8 damage, like necrotic damage to everyone within 15 or 20 feet of her, and that almost dropped everyone except for the paladin who made a save, so only took half damage. So they were like, "Oh my god, we need to kill this person." So they're doing their fight, and everything's going pretty well. Like, it's starting to lean in favor of the faction of the Sea Mother. Sorry if you can hear my dog whining in the background. She's just needy for attention right now. But yeah, so they're doing this whole thing, and then the characters do enough that essentially I think Sir Robert lays the killing blow on the archpriestess, and so he kind of sinks his sword into her shoulder. Or sorry, it was actually Bard. It was the half-orc barbarian Bard, and he drives her to her knees with this big overhand great axe attack, and it drives her to her knees and breaks the scepter that she was using to block, and the blade dives into her shoulder, and she kind of falls limp onto her, with this blade stuck in her, and the scene kind of goes quiet, and all the Kuo-toa are looking up. And this whole time, blood of the fallen has been like pooling into this depression in the ground that has a grate that they can just kind of hear. Like the whole altar is where the dark lake meets the shore, is where the shrine is. So they can hear the lapping of the dark lake under this thing, and all the blood is draining into this grated basin at the bottom. And a few of the characters noticed that while this was happening, like the water started to kind of froth, like something was eating the blood that was falling into the water, or it was agitating them or whatever, but they weren't sure what it was. And earlier on, the paladin even used his ability, like I can't remember if it's sense alignment or divine sense or something, and I basically say, well, you can sense something fiendish, you can sense something demonic, but it's not in your immediate vicinity, it's like further out towards the dark lake kind of thing. And that's all he could kind of figure out. And he's saying, okay, well, whatever, we'll see what happens. So anyways, everyone stops and is looking, and the archpriestess basically cries out, "Limagugun," and then just curls over and dies. And everyone's like, "Hey, yeah, we did it." And there's kind of a brief moment of celebration until it's like, whoa, there's this other sound you hear, and it's kind of off in the distance, and the waters of the dark lakes start to bubble, and then it starts to froth, and then one thick, oily black tentacle breaks the surface, followed by a second one, and then two heads start to rise out of the water that look like massive baboons with curling tusks. And as it continues to rise out of the water, you see that both heads are connected to the same body, and this huge monster raises itself up. It must be at least 30 feet tall, and its eyes are glowing, and it reaches its full height, and it rears back its head and lets out this roar and starts wading towards the shore where the city is. And at this point, everyone's like, oh my god. And all the Kuo-toa in this room stop what they're doing, throw down their weapons, hit the knees, and just start going, "Limagugun, Limagugun, Limagugun." And I guess it's kind of like, hey, you might not like the fact that there's this other god, but once that other god manifests itself, you basically say, well, I guess I'm going to change my ways. This is my new god now, because, he's going to smack me around if I don't. So the characters all kind of like, oh, we should just leave is what we should do. So the paladin at this point does a religion check, which, as you expect, he's got some skill at. And I say, yeah, based on your roll, that is Demogorgon. That is like the demon prince of the abyss. And somehow he's not in the Abyss. Somehow he has appeared in the Underdark in like his own form. And this is really weird, and this is very scary. And just upon seeing the rise of the Demon Prince of Madness, everyone had to take insanity saving checks, for which one of the party failed, actually, which was nice that only one of them failed. But that was our bard, and the bard now for 60 hours in game, so almost 3 days, is just deaf. It just has almost has just like a ringing in his ears type of thing, so he can't hear anything. So this big demon is wading his way towards the city, and the characters are like, we need to get out of here. So they cut the bonds on the deep dwarf that was also held captive, and they grab all their stuff. And Ken LaFlaunt says, okay, but we have like almost nothing. We need to go grab that treasure in that dude's closet. And I said, okay, that's what you want to do. So they hoof it like a couple blocks forward. And they make it to this closet, and Ken gets there first, and he whips open the closet, and he starts just piling all the treasure into this bag, and he gets it all. But at that point, I'm like, okay, well, now I need you to take a dex saving throw. And he says, okay. So he does it, and predictably he fails. In fact, I don't know if you notice, I'm wearing my shirt that is the Fallout agility attribute from the game Fallout, and I said I'm wearing this for you guys out of homage to the fact that you're so terrible at your dex saving throws. So to stay true to fashion, he fails. And I say, okay, so you're going to take, X amount of damage, as essentially a boat that was on the Dark Lake has been whipped and has fallen into the house that you're in. And so there's all this raining debris and rubble, and you're going to take this much damage. He says, okay, well, I drop then, because he was already injured from the previous fight. And so he drops to the ground, and he's unconscious now, and this is not good because they're just trying to get out of Dodge as fast as they can. So the rest of the party kind of starts to show up, and the half-orc just kind of basically picks the bag of treasure up on one shoulder, holsters his axe, picks up Ken LaFlaunt, and basically says, okay, let's get out of here. So they all start running, and I'm saying, well, you guys have an option now. You can either try and escape via land to go wherever you want to go next, or you can basically try and grab a boat and head out into the Dark Lake. And that's pretty meta, but I didn't describe it to them that way. It was more like, okay, well, here's what you can do. They actually asked Jim Jar. They said, Jim Jar, you're from Blingdenstone. We kind of want to go there. How do we get there? And Jim Jar says, I don't, I'm not familiar with the tunnels in this area, and we should probably just grab a boat, and we can get anywhere we want to on the Dark Lake. I don't know where we're going to go, but we can get anywhere. And all the PCs are like, are you nuts? The demon's out on the Dark Lake. And so they say, well, here's what we're going to do. So if this is the city, if this is the expanse of the city, and the Dark Lake is up here, they figure, why don't we run... Demogorgon's over here. Why don't we run this way and go to these docks and then go out that way? So that's their plan. And it wasn't a bad plan. And our paladin is always complaining that he has crap rolls when he's trying to attack. So they're running, and at this point I'm considering it, as the book would suggest, that the first part of their escape is through land. So I say, okay, Sebastian, I need you to roll a d20 for me. And he rolls a natural 20, and he's really happy. He's like, oh yeah, finally I've rolled a 20. And in the book it says, yeah, if they roll a 17 to 20, they're ambushed by a party of 2d4 Kuatoa. So not only does he roll a nat 20, and I'm like, well, sucks to suck, but here's now you're being ambushed, but I literally rolled a pair of 4s. So 8 kind of driven mad Kuatoa show up, and they're just immediately hostile, and they ambush the party. So in the book it also says that after 4 rounds, Demogorgon reaches the shore and just Godzilla style starts demolishing this village, this little town. So round 1 was them grabbing all of their stuff from the altar and doing a few checks and that kind of thing. Round 2 was them getting to the archpriest's archpriest's former home and grabbing all the treasure. Turn 3 was them running halfway across the village and then getting ambushed. So turn 4 was the first round of combat. So this happens, and they're not overly difficult, these Kuatoa. you know, they have low AC, they don't have a huge pool of hit points, but they can do some damage, especially again to level 2 characters. So they run in, and their first round of combat is the 4th round of Demogorgon wading towards the shore. And they're doing their combat. It's not going terribly. It's not going poorly at all. They're doing a pretty good job. However, this combat bogged them down, and the way that I wanted to play that out was essentially for them to say, okay, well, now every round that Demogorgon is on shore, because I had 4 party members, you know, my turtle, so like my tortoise person monk, that player couldn't make it tonight, so we had our party of 4 of the warlock, the bard, the barbarian, and the paladin. And so I said, okay, there's 4 of you guys, so I was rolling a d4, and I assigned them all a number, and whichever number got rolled, they were going to have to either take some kind of like athletics or dexterity saving throw as debris is raining down or a tentacle of Demogorgon happens to lash by, or they're going to take a charisma saving throw to try and resist the maddening influence of this demon prince. So that's what we were doing, and I think that like at one point the barbarian was going to be destroyed by a tentacle coming down on top of him, and Shushar, the Awakened, actually, he's a pacifist. He never contributes in battle, but he essentially pushed the barbarian out of the way, and when the smoke clears, he was nowhere to be seen, just a pile of rubble, essentially. So that's what happened there. And then I think I had a couple other times where two more of my players failed insanity, like madness checks, and one of them, the one that was really unfortunate, is that my warlock got a bout of short-term madness. So it only lasts 4 minutes, but he got one that basically says, well, you start babbling incoherently, you kind of lose the ability to talk, and you can't cast spells. And he's a warlock. And he's like the last standing member of the party at near the end of this fight, and he's like, oh my god, what am I going to do? So the fight is playing through, Demogorgon's rampaging around, and they get to a point where Sir Bastion is basically holding off the majority of these Kuo-toa and says to everyone else, just get out of here, just go. And some of the able-bodied NPCs like Jimjar and the twin deep gnomes, Topsy and Turvy, they're starting to jump in with their stolen short swords and just trying to wail and do some damage. And long story short, eventually the barbarian, she basically says, okay, I'm heading towards the docks now because I think the situation is manageable enough. And she had also failed one of her madness saving throws that basically made her super averse to anything demonic. So Demogorgon is creating a big mess, and she's like, I'm getting out of here. So she makes it to the docks and unravels the first keel boat, of which they'll need 2 because they only seat 6, and there's about 8 to 10 of them at this point. So she unhinges this boat, and that's what she's doing. And then some of the NPCs follow after her. And then at that point, the combat's continuing, and Sir Robert gets dropped, and there's 1 Kuo-toa left, and that's when this whole shenanigans with the spellcaster started. And the warlock says, well, I can't cast spells, and I'm not doing enough damage with my dagger to this guy. So he says, I just start flailing my arms and going blah, 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 loud enough so that one of the party members can hear. So Ken is deaf from previous madness, so he's hearing nothing. The half-orc barbarian fails perception check. Half the NPCs fail their perception check, but then one of the twins who does hear kind of stops halfway to the boat, turns around and goes back. And one of the interesting things, because they were kind of curious about these twins earlier in this session, because they're like, yeah, they never say much and they're kind of weird. So one of these twins comes back and does a bunch of damage to draw aggro kind of thing from this Kuo-toa, this surviving Kuo-toa that's fighting them. And the Kuo-toa turns around and basically stabs the little deep gnome with his spear. And I asked the warlock to take a perception check, and he rolls really well. And I say, so you see this spear drive into the shoulder of this deep gnome, and as it retracts and the deep gnome is kind of wincing, you see the wound almost instantly just close up. And he's like, that's weird. But anyways, moving right along. So they kill this last Kuo-toa. They all escape. They jump onto the boat, under raining debris and all that kind of thing. And these 2 boats start moving out onto the dark lake, and I said, okay, you guys did it. You've escaped Sloopbudop, you've witnessed the rise of Demogorgon, but you've managed to escape that as well. You're now on boats on the Dark Lake, and the only question I have for you guys now is where are you going to go next? And so they say, well, Stool is just like a kid, and he wants to go back to Neverlight Grove, and he's not very useful to us as a party member in combat anyways, so maybe we should drop him off. And then a couple people were like, well, we should go to Blingdenstone, because that sounds like the only place down here that could be safe. Like, it's the Deep Gnomes seem like well-mannered people. We should go there. And the Deep Dwarf that they rescue is like, well, we should go to Gracklestugh. And Jimjar says, well, we should go to Blingdenstone. And they're saying, well, how far is it, like, how long is it going to take us to get to these places? And they ask the relevant, NPCs who would know this. And I said, well, you travel a little bit faster on the Dark Lake than you would if you were just traveling normal speed on land. But, roughly speaking, it's like you're equidistant from Blingdenstone or Gracklestugh. Neverlight Grove is further away. So they say, okay, well then let's just pick between Blingdenstone and Gracklestugh. I say for about each, it's about 14 days of in-game travel time. And they saw how tough 8 days was. And they have no idea what kind of challenges wait on the Dark Lake as opposed to just walking around the tunnels. So eventually what they say is, well, the Warlock character is like, his background is that he's like a merchant prince almost kind of thing. Like, he's just very well connected economically through like trading guilds and that kind of thing. And he says, well, we should go somewhere where I can have some connections. And he says, so that sounds like the Blingdenstone. And Jimjar's like, well, not really. Like, we're a settlement, but we're kind of in a rebuild phase. And he doesn't go more deep into that. But he's like, there's no real big trading posts there. And he says, well, I guess that would be the same for Gracklestugh then, right? And the Deep Dwarf is like, well, no, like Gracklestugh is a major center of population. Like, it's known as the City of Blades, and it has an entire market and all this kind of stuff. So at that point, they're thinking to themselves, okay, well, it's going to take us just as long to get to Gracklestugh as it does to Blingdenstone. In Gracklestugh, one of our friends might have some connections to help us out. And on top of that, this Deep Dwarf that we saved is basically saying, look, I owe you one kind of thing. You saved my life, so the very least I can do is get you through the gates of Gracklestugh kind of thing. So they say, okay, well, I guess we'll go to Gracklestugh then. And then that's where we kind of ended the session off. And I milestoned everyone to level 3. And I said, okay, that's the last milestone level you're getting. From here on out, it's going to be solely XP based, because when you start the campaign, it says, look, you can start your player characters as prisoners at level 3 to start, because it is a harder campaign. It says, or alternatively, you can start them at level 1 to emphasize the severity of their situation. And they wanted to start at level 1 anyways. The early levels can be pretty fun and leads to a unique kind of roleplay experience. So we started at level 1, and once they escaped from Valkenvelve, I said, okay, you're level 2 now. And then they traversed the Underdark, and it experienced Sloopbudop and escaped from Demogorgon. I said, okay, level 3. And now it'll be an actual accrual of experience to see, to have them level up again. So they have a direction they're going in. They have a new companion. They lost a companion. And they're now going to be traversing the Dark Lake on their 2 keelboats. And it's a good thing they took that Deep Dwarf with them, because to navigate the Dark Lake is almost more difficult than navigating the tunnels of the Underdark, and Shushar would have been great at it, but he's gone. So, I mean, at that point, the Deep Dwarves are the next most apt race at navigating this underground network of lakes and rivers and that kind of thing. So they have him with them, so that should help them not to get too lost. But it's still going to be 14 days of travel time. There's still going to be random encounters, of which I have already prepped. And so the next time we sit down to play, it'll probably just be their entire journey towards Gracklestugh. So that's going to be really interesting and fun, and see how much more they learn about this Deep Dwarf. Hemeth is his name. They're going to learn about Hemeth, and all kinds of stuff. So yeah, that's where we're at. Thank you very much for watching episode 3 of Dungeon Master's Journal for Out of the Abyss, and I look forward to updating you guys on the next part of our story. Okay, happy gaming.